Hi, everybody. It's May 1st, 2013. Can you believe it? It's May Day. May Day. I don't know what that means, actually. Where did that come from? But my name is Dan Boul. I'm president of 65 Amps. As you can tell from the proliferation of the number 65 everywhere on your screen, for those of you who are listening on the radio. And I'm at my office in Los Angeles, California, and this is my weekly web show called Lunch with Dan Boul. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I highly encourage you to log in, register, and join us on the chat. There's going to be a chat window going up and down here, so I'll be reading that and trying to speak in complete sentences to the best of my ability. You do never see me eat lunch on this show, as correctly pointed out here on the chat window. That's because I have an eating disorder where all the food comes out of my nose. Yeah, I know. I should just bring lunch in. I've never had lunch on Lunch with Dan Boul. I'm assuming you're eating lunch, at least guys here on the West Coast of the United States. Anyway, we're going to talk. I usually try to play guitar on the show, and we've knocked a hole in the wall. I'm getting it set up. We are moving forward. And it's, as being pointed out, it's after 5 a.m. on the 2nd of May in Australia, where there's a lot of guys here. Yeah. So anyway, I thought today we would discuss a few things. I posted just a tickler question on Facebook a couple days ago about, is guitar rock dead? And I have very distinct thoughts about it, but this generated so much interest. It was like 5,000 people read it, according to the stats, and I got like 100 responses on it. And I wasn't saying that guitar rock is dead. I was just curious about your opinion, because I have this conversation with people out here in Los Angeles all the time. And I have a couple of ideas I thought I'd share with you. See what you think. And, you know, it's kind of a funny thing, because as most of you know, my level of analysis on things is somewhat neurotic. And I'm a researcher, and I try to be sort of broad-minded as much as I can. And I have some theories. But I don't think guitar rock is dead. There's a lot of great guitar music around. It's just not getting any traction. Like, kids don't listen to it. And we've gone through periods like this before in history. They just haven't been this long. We look at the history of rock and roll. The original rock and rollers were guys that took country music and blues, mixed it up into a nice little stew, and then sped it up. And that scared everybody, scared all the parents. My parents were the ones that had Pat Boone on top of their dresser and Little Richard in the drawer. Because you had Little Richard, a gay black man singing about sex in the 50s. For those of you that didn't know Little Richard was gay, I just go like this. Like, have you seen Little Richard? Have you heard him talk? But the initial rock and rollers, they brought little white kids and little black kids together. And, it was really cool, and it was rebellion, and it was all these sorts of things, kicking back against conformity. And then conformity took over, and we had, some really lily white, clean pop music from maybe 59 to 63. It was a long period of, really clean music. And then the Beatles came along. They had long hair, which, even though it looks short to us now, in 1964, when they came over here, they looked like girls. And that scared the parents. And that music was loud and it was fast. But it was danceable, like it got the kids together. And that kind of lasted for a long time. Like good, loud guitar rock was mainstream stuff for a long time. And then I think the 60s kind of wore everyone out. And then we kind of went into this easy listening 70s thing for a minute. You know, Bread and Leo Sayer and, you know, You Make Me Feel Like That. And just crap. And then, and funk was still happening. Hard rock was underground. You know, Led Zeppelin never got on the charts, if you can believe that. Never. But Debbie Boone singing You Light Up My Life was #1 for 16 weeks. But the rock and roll was kind of underground. Disco happened. And I think everybody had enough, said, all right, fuck, you know. And then we had, you know, the new wave guys showed up. My Sharona happened. Punk started happening, you know. Guitar music came back. And that lasted for maybe 4 or 5 years. And then we had, you know, Depeche Mode and Kajagoogoo and Massive Poo Poo, whatever those bands were. You know, it went completely the other way. And then that lasted for about another 5 years. And then you had the Black Crowes and Guns N' Roses and all that kind of stuff happened. Glam rock hit. SRV did an amazing amount of good every day he was alive, but he just wasn't on the radio. Like, it wasn't mainstream stuff. Yes, Flock of Seagulls. And, you know, those guys happened, and then Nirvana happened, and the Foo Fighters, and, you know, that whole thing. And then I think 9/11 kind of knocked us back into the 1950s as far as we want safe, conforming sort of thing. And then you add in iTunes and the ability of people to make hit music on their computer and not have to do a lot of work and make a lot of money. And it's kind of stretched out that cycle right now because record companies are broke. They're all really broke. And they make a lot of money by just churning out this lowest common denominator crap. But I think 9/11 and terrorism and all these sorts of things made people go over to this conformist thing. Rebellion's not that cool. Bonamassa is great too. I love Joe. But you're never going to hear Joe on the radio. He's never going to get rich. And I hate to say that because he's a great player and he's a really nice person. I've met him a couple times in person. Astonishingly nice. Just normal guy. And there's lots of bands. I can name a huge long list of bands. Oh, these are great guitar rock bands, but there's no traction there. You know, like, I don't know how old you guys are. I'm 47. And when I was a kid, there was 2 or 3 televisions before the internet, of course. There was 2 or 3 television shows where you got to figure out what was happening. What was the next best thing? For the mainstream, it was American Bandstand. And you see that. And bands that were on there were usually climbing, doing really well. For the sort of second tier of rock and roll stuff, there was the Midnight Special, which was great. First time I saw Tom Petty, you know, Midnight Special. It was incredible. Those sorts of things. Yeah, you can hear John Mayer on the radio, but not that much. And, you know, there's differing opinions about Mayer. He plays guitar really well, but he plays just like old guys, you know. He's not doing anything innovative. And then there was Saturday Night Live, you know, where they had the freaking Sex Pistols on there, Elvis Costello, crazy bands. And they were great. Yes, I've seen Dave Grohl's speech, Eric, and it's good. So, you know, and each time one of those lull periods happened, it seems like there was some precipitating event that would just jerk it in a whole nother direction. And that's kind of what we're missing now, because all the guitar rock that I hear sounds very much to be a product of something I've already heard. I know that's kind of a function of age. After a while, everything starts to sound the same. But that's right. Dick Cavett had David Bowie on. That guy was downright dangerous. He was dressing up like women and simulating oral sex on stage with his guitar player. And that was edgy then. Now it's sort of passe. It's like, yeah, okay. But, so we're in need of that. And some of it has to do with the gear. I think that guitars and amplifiers got to be such a fuzzy, buzzy background noise that it changed the way people think about guitar music. Guitars become a background instrument now. And you look on the top 40, it's really rare to see a guitar band doing well. There's the occasional blip. The Black Keys have got a couple of hit songs, but they come and go. It doesn't spawn imitators. Jack White once in a while. Chell says he can make his guitar sound like a seagull. That's right, Eric, Jack White. R.J. Sanders said, guitar rock used to be big on AM radio, then FM, then word of mouth, so it goes. Yeah, but it's it is what it is. I don't think it's dead, and you can still enjoy it and have a great time. The massive amount of compression used to mix stuff for, half of us listen to our music with these things now. So that's not good instead of these things. David Hayes says, I can't make my guitar sound like a guitar. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the big thing. Guys like David Hayes, who makes great Fender-style amps, if you guys are looking for one. You know what? David and several other guys and myself, all we do is make amps that are accurate, which used to be standard in the 50s and 60s. It's just how you made amps. There's no big deal. And really what we do isn't wizardry. It takes skill, and it takes dedication, and it takes strict attention to detail and all that kind of stuff. But these days, that's unusual, which is crazy. Joe Satriani making new. Yeah, unfortunately, people associate guitar rock with Nickelback. Yeah. Yeah. And also some elements of country music try to incorporate guitar stuff, and it's, big 80s semi-radio metal sounds with a fiddle. Yeah, Rock and Roll Willie says, for my 2 cents worth, guitar rock will never be mainstream again. I kind of believe that might be the case. I mean, the music business is incredibly segmented over what it used to be. Do you think YouTube, John Priest, good question. Do you think YouTube has really stopped guitarists from learning that craft out gigging instead of just demo clips of playing at home? Yeah, I think the draw of a live band is different than it was when I was a kid, because it was unusual. To go hear a band in a club that played pretty well wasn't something that happened all the time. And it was fun because we didn't have a computer to just browse through every music that's ever been recorded in the history of the planet. So if you wanted to hear music, a lot of times you had to go out and hear it. And we had to buy records. And records were expensive. The last time I bought albums regularly, the early 80s, before CDs kind of really got traction, records were $15 and $16. That's 30 years ago. And that's, the equivalent of, what, $30, $40 today? So kids, you couldn't buy that many records. Uh, yeah, that's true, Richard. That's a good point. Richard Reese Laird asks, "Is this just an American thing? Because South Americans and Europeans still seem to still embrace rock guitar acts." Yes, I think so. Yeah, Wilco's great. Don't get me wrong, but they're playing in 500 seat theaters. Um, Wilco's not going to play at Staples anytime soon, which I wish they were. Um, so, yeah, I think definitely the guitar is more respected in other areas because they're not so dominated by the record labels like the United States and Western Europe are. Because we are somewhat at the record label's mercy. Don't kid yourself. Whatever's played on the radio is what the record companies want played on the radio. You have your oldies stations, but all the new music that's being played on the radio is controlled by record labels. Bob Dragich brings up a good point. The younger people don't play guitars right now because it's never cool to do what your parents did. Just when guitar music seemed dead, SRV and others came out of nowhere. Just wait, it'll happen. Yeah, I think so. That's the other thing. Rock and roll was music that scared our parents. Now it's what our parents listen to. I mean, my daughters are 8 and 10, and they're like, yeah, we kind of like rock and roll, Dad. When you and Grandpa were listening to the Rolling Stones in the living room, it was kind of fun. Because, I'll listen to rock and roll with my dad. My dad's 70. He still likes rock and roll. It's not his favorite kind of music anymore, but... Pukachu says, I'm surrounded by kids that play guitar. That's really interesting because... yeah... I don't think the metal thing scares the parents anymore because most of the parents remember Ozzy Osbourne biting off a pigeon head or whatever the hell, bat's head or whatever in the hell he did. So we look at these guys that are all dressed up in clown makeup and you just kind of go, okay, whatever. They probably work out every day and they drive on a nice bus and, it's like the heavy metal guys now, it really seems like it's an act. They're imitating bands, old guys. Dove's Head, yeah, that's right. Alice Cooper. All the Led Zeppelin stories. Judas Priest, all those bands. The young metal bands, I mean, they're all like healthy guys and they're having tofu and sushi and they go work out and they get their sleep and it's sort of like that FedEx commercial. You've seen that where the heavy metal band, their manager gets all pissed off at him because there's pictures of them going through the airport with their golf clubs. He's like, guys, you can't do this. He's like, why? I love golf. It's great. And he goes, you guys are supposed to be full of anger and hate. And he says, well, I don't hate golf. Then their manager goes, tear some shit up, go crazy. And he throws a vase of flowers on the floor, and they all just kind of go, And then he goes, I'll get some water for those flowers. Orianthi is a great guitar player. So we've been dumbed down to Gary Clark Jr., who's a good player, but not... I don't even know who Gary Clark Jr. is. Yeah, Guns N' Roses was dangerous. So was Nirvana. John Mayer, not dangerous. That's a very good point. So it's just a different vibe, something needs to come out. Tal Wickenfield is a great bass player. That's right. And she has a beautiful right breast. I can't see the other one because of the bass, but anyway. Yeah, Peter, I listen to old music. I mean, I don't want new guys to sound like old guys, though. That's the thing. When I hear, John Mayer, who does an astonishingly good Stevie Ray Vaughan impression, I just go listen to Stevie. If It'd be nice if he incorporated some of Stevie Ray's stuff into a new thing. But he doesn't do that. He just, I hear all of his licks and go, oh, that's from that song, and that's from that song. And John plays great. Don't get me wrong. He's an extremely talented guy. John Butler Ocean. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I thought Radiohead was the future too for a while. But they're not dangerous. They're just sort of like stone college kids, you know? Like, okay, you know. Our parents put us in college and we abuse that by getting high all the time, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not they're so creative and so out there that I think it's too much for the mainstream. Yeah, Eric says, John Mayer loses me when he opens his mouth. He does have a tendency to stick his foot in his mouth. I'm not talking down metal, Chell. It's just even metal now is sort of recycling a lot of things, I guess is the right way to say it. Wishbone Ash was amazing. That's right. But I mean, it's one of those things where I think there's a big audience, you know, because what's funny, because I go out and play gigs, or when I go to other gigs, you play a guitar rock and roll song, the little kids get up and dance, and the grandma gets up and dance, and people our age get up and dance. Everyone responds to rock and roll. It's universal. And I don't think metal is the future, Chell. I think metal's kind of already happened. It's a small niche. If you look at the record sales and touring revenues, metal's pretty small. It is what it is. But metal's a lot smaller than country. Yeah, Radiohead is intellectual, yet they sell out huge venues. Yeah, I'm not a huge Radiohead fan. I really respect them, but if I'm going to be honest, they don't really make my heart beat at all, but they're interesting. And I think Tom is a very bright guy. And since I never ate a lot of acid, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, they're my age. They're old farts. Anyway, so I was just tossing that around because we had this huge discussion about, is rock dead? You know, it's not dead. I think it's just gone down the primrose path and needs to be jerked off of it. Pardon the... Ooh, that didn't come out right, did it? It needs to be removed. Yeah, Dr. Knoll. This is a good point. The only music that can be dangerous is stuff coming from the streets. And even then, only before it's turned into a product. If that cycle from the street to product, that's so fast now. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Howard Johnson, good question. Do you think it's evolved? I think it has somewhat. I think it's kind of evolved down a dead-end street, though. You know, like, when I say dead, I mean dead like Latin. You know, Latin is a dead language, but it's still beautiful. You know, there's things that... When people are doing rock and roll now, it's just elements of past. You know, I don't hear a lot of new stuff. Latin is still a beautiful language, but there's no new words in Latin. You know, they don't update the Latin dictionary. I think the last time they updated the Latin dictionary was 400 years ago or something. And I'm a little concerned that rock and roll is going that way. You know, the original rock and roll was taking two distinct forms of music and putting them together in a new way. And each major phase of rock and roll interjected something new that was fun and interesting. You know, the Beatles brought in sort of a level of songwriting that was unheard of in popular music. And then Jimi Hendrix, you know, he took all the blues stuff and he took all the rock stuff and all the pop stuff and molded it up into one thing and then played it better than anybody ever had. And you could hear his influences in there, but he wasn't copying somebody. If Hendrix was alive, gosh knows what he would have been doing. I think he probably would have gone down the path that Jeff Beck did, but who knows? His creativity seemed to be pretty boundless. The amount of drugs that he was doing, though, probably might have limited that. It's a good point. And the other thing that's gone from rock and roll, and I think it's the key element that's missing, is that, you know, if we're going to be honest, rock and roll was African American music. Big budgets. Yeah, that's true too. That's true. But rock and roll is African American music that little white kids tried to imitate. And you see that a lot in hip hop now. There's a lot of parallels with rock and roll and hip hop. And every time we were introduced to some form of rock and roll by African Americans, white kids would take it in a certain direction. The African American contingency took it in a different direction. Usually what would happen is the African American contingency would do better with it than we did. And so then the white kids would go, hey, let's go do that. And then they'd water it down and make it more mainstream, which is exactly what's happening with hip hop. And I think funk was the last iteration of that rock and roll family tree. And then when we did disco, that was just sort of the last straw. You know, it's like, okay, we're going to turn left here. And African American music changed quite a bit. Or at least the stuff from the kids, you know, coming up. And, you know, now it's a lot more unified than it was back then. Thank God we're all doing that better. But, and when we started hearing rap initially, you know, all those sorts of things, it took a long time for the mainstream music to catch up to that. And we saw lots of really bad versions of that, you know, with Vanilla Ice and crap like that. But one exception being the Beastie Boys, who I thought were fantastic. So I think that's what's missing right now. You know, we're in this period like the Tin Pan Alley sort of early 60s stuff. So what's left from black music? I don't know, Howard. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting trends in black music that I'm aware of. And there's a lot of songwriting people who are mixing more jazz and pop music now that has an edge to it, like Esperanza Spalding and people like that, who I think are amazing. And I think it's time for some long-haired guy with a loud guitar to pick up on that and go, look, this is fantastic. You need to hear this. But I'm going to frame it a little differently so that you can digest it. Not so much water it down, but, you know, you hear a lot of jazz on, you know, like satellite radio and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the Roots are fantastic. I love the Roots. I want to be in that band, you know. But what they're missing is the songwriting that's mainstream. Their playing ability is stupid. I mean, they're just fantastic. Jimmy Fallon scored getting those guys on his show. I don't know how. That was just a brilliant move to have the Roots, because I think they would have gone on to be big recording artists. They're just missing the songwriting. So if you guys don't know, Howard Johnson here, who's on with us, who's a friend and neighbor of mine, is a fantastic songwriter. And it's one of those things. There's that one. Oh, you're welcome, Howard. You've earned it, man. It's one of those things. It's that little spark. And you see people like this trying to do it, like when Mick Jagger did the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert with Raphael Sadiq. You know, Raphael Sadiq he's mixing jazz, he's mixing funk, he's mixing R&B. Just the songwriting's not quite there. But did you guys see that when Mick Jagger did the tribute to Solomon Burke? Yeah, Living Color. Living Color was ridiculously good. They just didn't write that great of songs. Vernon Reid was fantastic. And you look at that song, man, their big hit, Cult of Personality. That thing moves. Moves. Even now, how old is that song? 18 years old or something? It moves. Like, oh boy. And that's what happens when you have that African-American influence on rock and roll. It was the mix of the two that made it magical. And that has lots of meanings, philosophically, spiritually, emotionally, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go there because I love that too. That's one of my main draws to rock and roll, is it's that glue, you know. But just musically, that's what's missing right now. It's missing. To me, that's my humble thesis. Take it with a grain of salt. I could be wrong. I could just be nothing but wrong. But I think that's where we are. And there's a few bands. Yeah, the Chili Peppers get a little bit of funk going in their stuff. It sounds pretty good. Yeah, you're right, John. So what two elements mix now? Money and internet. Why aren't you a producer? I'd love to be a producer. Thanks, Howard. I mean, again, that's just my humble opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. Because I've been thinking about this for like 20 years. And, you know, like I was saying, it's that element. And it's hard to talk about that without accidentally sounding like a dork, you know, because I don't want to generalize that African-American musicians do this and Caucasian musicians do that. We all know white guys that can play their asses off, and we all know black guys that can't. You know, so it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's that mix. It's that mix that's magical. That sort of embracing of the other's genre that made rock and roll magical. I mean, look at Chuck Berry. His lyrics are country lyrics. But he recorded that stuff at Chess Records in Chicago with Willie Dixon on bass. You know, he was using Muddy Waters' band. And that was that magical mix. That was that thing. You know, Little Richard was using, you know, gospel forms. He just sped it up with really simple lyrics. You know, he was using church music. You know, the Beatles, you go from Chuck Berry, who embraced country lyrics. You know, riding along in my automobile. That's not a blues song. You know what I mean? You know, sweet little 16, she's got the grown-up blues. That's not a blues tune. Right? Those are country lyrics. But he played it with blues guitar. Urban dance squat, Peter. I don't know what that means, but I like it. Yeah, Maybelline was Ida Red. That's right. You know, Johnny B. Good tells a story like a country song does. A good country song tells a story. I'm not talking about the crying in your beer bullshit. I'm talking about like good country. George Jones, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson. You know, all those guys, they tell a story. And they get to the heart of the matter. Like, oh, that's too intimate, it hurts. That's why a lot of people can't even deal with country, because it's so intimate, it's uncomfortable. And most forms of music don't have lyrics that intimate. That's why it's hard for people. I get it. That's fine. But Chuck Berry was playing, you know, that kind of thing. The Beatles, the exact opposite. You know, white kids from Liverpool who until they really got into rock and roll, they were doing show tunes almost. You know, they were singing ballads and show tunes and skiffle, which is country. And then they embraced the African American thing. And they did their best to go after it. And damn if they didn't turn into a good rock and roll band. Then you go even further. You take the Rolling Stones. Those guys want to be black. They named their band after a Muddy Waters song. Their entire goal was to sound black. And what a rock and roll band, right? It's that mix. It's that mix. Led Zeppelin, they played blues songs. They played Willie Dixon songs. You know, half of their songs were just straight rip-offs out of Chess Records. Then, of course, they evolved and did some other stuff. But, you know, a lot of their Whole Lot of Love is a Willie Dixon song, you know. And they actually ended up having to pay him for that later. I mean, they didn't even change the words. So that's where all these little things add up to me, where it's like, that's what's missing right now. That's why Nickelback is a joke. It's like they're a rock and roll band missing some DNA. Like, where is the rock, man? I just hear loud guitars. Where is the groove? Yeah, I'll produce your records. That's fine. I'd love to be a producer, but boy, you want to talk about a low chance of making any money. Yeah, outlaw country, Eric D11 says. Yeah, Steve Marriott did a tune like that too. It came out way before Whole Lot of Love. Yeah, and those guys were embracing the African American thing. So you got, on one hand, some African American things, artists that were embracing, you know, the more white kind of music, and they blended it really well. Chuck Berry is, I think, the best example of that. You know, and Chuck Berry is God to the Rolling Stones, who write a lot of country songs. Have you ever listened to Dead Flowers? I mean, that's a country song. Almost all their ballads are country songs, and the rest of their songs sound like Chuck Berry. What happens if African American musicians try to sound white? Could be the next thing. Well, Howard, yeah, a little bit. Howard does very good pop stuff. He's written a lot of songs that are hits. There are a lot of African American artists that, I don't know if they're trying to sound white, but they do. I think that might be a little too general to say that, because not all black musicians sound the same, and not all white musicians sound the same. But Howard's laughing his ass off over here. Yeah, a friend of mine produces Shooter Jennings. David Cobb produces Shooter, and I've been there when he's recording, and Shooter's like his dad, man. He's a simple guy who just lays it down. You know, it's really good. Write music that you can censor to. That's what every great song has in common. Yeah, there's a little bit of that too. The next big Josh. Josh scores again. Thank you, Josh. It wouldn't be one of my shows without just an absolute home run from Josh, who says the next big thing will be Mexicans trying to sound. Oh my God. That is so good. Oh, thank you, Josh. Guitar Dom says, I play clubs in Chicago and too often see bands imitating past styles instead of being influenced and building upon it. That's a good way of putting it, Dom. There's a lot of guys that just regurgitate old stuff, and Hell, I can listen to the record. I mean, I don't mind. I like to go see bands play old music if they do it pretty well. Um, um, you know, that's cool. But it's not, it's a short lived thing. Like, remember in the 80s when the Stray Cats came out and we all went, wow, that's really cool. And that made us go, like, dig up Eddie Cochran records and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then, like, a year later, we all went, you know. Salsa Gangnam Style. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, German folk music as done by Jamaicans. Whatever. I was trying to think of the whitest and the blackest things I could put together. You want Jack Douglas to produce you and Dan to engineer. Well, I'll do all that stuff for a fee. That's no problem. Crud. Hang on a second. My daughter got hurt. Make sure what's going on here. Okay. Let me answer this really quick. My daughter got a little messed up at school. Sorry, guys. Okay. All is good. Polka sped up. Yeah, punk polka. Punka. There it is. We came up with it. Punk. She's fine. She's got a bad cut, apparently. African opera. Yeah, that would be pretty good. Thank you, guys. She's fine. It's just my kids. I don't, you know. I love you guys and I love everything else, but I don't love you 1/10 as much as I love my kids. So it's always important, even if she just got a bad cut on her finger. It's very important to me because I'm a sap. If you meet my daughters, you'd understand. God likes me. I don't know why. I'm such a lucky guy. Anyway. Yeah, Pikachu, all good movements are born out of rebellion, rock, hip-hop, metal, punk. That's why, like, when you do those things now, you know, like even metal, like, you know, most of these metal bands are kids that grew up in suburbs getting driven to school in a Benz. It's like, what are you pissed off about? That your rich dad worked too much and couldn't spend enough time with you? You know, you had to drive a domestic car when you were in college. It's like, you know. Yeah. And I remember, like, it was like this in the 90s. You know, there were all these little pseudo hippies who bought their tie-dye at the mall. And it was like, that's not the point, you know. Like, it's okay to put on the costume. I get that. But it's just such a regurgitation of something, you know, like. Hippies didn't get their tie-dye at the mall, okay? Okay? Yeah, you know, kids are pissed off now because they don't have an Xbox. Okay. I'm sorry. Record companies do have some of this. And you know what, though? I know a lot of people in the record business, and the digital thing, you know, downloading music, has screwed their business model. I mean, it's really hard for them to make money. And they have shareholders, and they have debt, and they have all this kind of stuff. This is a good point, Richard, and I'm going to address this in a minute. But they can make money. A kid on a laptop with Pro Tools and Amp Farm can make a pretty good sounding record, better than the demos I cut in the 90s for $20,000. Or in the 80s, and they make money on it. So they're peddling shit. I mean, there's just no real record. There's no highbrow record labels right now that have any money. So it's economics. And I also think there's a big cultural thing since 9/11. We're in this 50s conformity mode. You know, we're all Americans fighting against, you know, crazy people that want to kill us. So Richard Reese-Laird, great question. and we should post this on Facebook and let people go nuts with it. So he asked, so without real hardship, there is no real art. I think I might agree with that, he says. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't think that it's absolute. That's a big joke with everyone I know in the music business. They get a big artist, they find some, kid who's homeless living in his car who plays guitar and sings really well, and he puts out a record and it's fantastic, and he's a junkie and all these sort of things. And then they get success, they get healthy, they get safe and secure, they get married, God forbid, and then they can't write anything. And like, send a hooker over to the house with cocaine, like this, he's no good anymore. And we've seen that with a lot of artists, they get a couple of 3 records out and do really well. And then all of a sudden their muse is gone. Literally, I'm quoting people I know in the record business. They just joke about, oh no, he's married and he's not using drugs. Send a hooker over. Ruin his marriage. Get a picture of him with some half-naked girl, just. And it's hard to write meaningful music, I think, when you're really happy. I had one little writing spurt in the 80s when I wrote songs that I'm not embarrassed about. And the songs were pretty okay. And then I kind of got happy again, and I was writing, I get in my car and I drive real far. Like, oh, fuck, it's weird. And I don't know if you guys ever watched that Inside the Actor Studio show where they reveal that every successful actor at some point had major trauma in his childhood. Most of them come from broken homes. As a matter of fact, almost all of them. And I think the same is true for musicians. There's a few exceptions, but you look at John Lennon and Paul McCartney. If you've read about John Lennon's upbringing, it was brutal. Very brutal, full of heartbreak, and him being, abandoned a lot. And Paul McCartney's mom died when he was really young, and his dad took care of him and his brother and wasn't around a whole lot. What's that? So that's why real music will not come out of the suburbs. You have to look elsewhere. Come on, like Jason Becker. Yes, Pikachu brings up Roy Orbison. Do you guys know Roy Orbison's story? I mean, I forget the exact chain of events, but he accidentally killed one of his children on the back of his motorcycle. And then very shortly thereafter, his house burned down and his wife died. Oh my God. Just horrible stories. Not Bob Dylan. Yeah, I don't know about Bob Dylan. I think he's unique in many ways. Lodvar says, truth. I've written my best songs in my darkest places. Absolutely. So, people get mad at McCartney for writing trite songs. But, he married Linda and he got happy. And, yeah, his music changed. He wasn't pissed off anymore. There was no edge to it. When Clapton was using, I think his music was a lot better. Yeah, I love Eric Clapton and I'll always love him. But in the last 2 shows I've seen Clapton, he sat down for half the show on a stool. And everything was at about 60 beats a minute. And I was just about ready to kill myself. Yes, Tony brings up the golden era analogy. Yeah, that's true. Tony Conley and I had this conversation a couple of months ago. It was sort of like, every major art form has a golden period. And then when it starts to wane, it's just a cycle of people regurgitating it or recycling it, I guess is the best way to say it. And I think that's a great analogy. And who was the artist that gave you that analogy, Tony? I forgot who it was. What a drag. I trashed my music career, Richard says. because I felt I was unworthy, and from a something background, I felt I needed to be more like the lucky ones. Turns out I was discounting my greatest gift. Yeah, it could be. Could be. Neil Peart lost his daughter and wife the same year. Since then, his lyrics keep getting better. Yeah. It's a horrible story, but Eric D. Greg Lake, that's right. The era of shared music. Yeah, that's right. Also, 50-year-olds don't write good music. Once the brain becomes calcified, your creative window closes no matter how troubled you are. Oh, really? Shit, I'm going to be 48 this summer. Yeah. Yeah, the only thing Clapton did after losing his son was he did that blues record, which I thought was pretty good, that From the Cradle record. I thought that was a good record. Like, that's been my favorite Clapton record since Derek and the Dominoes. It was very cool. Lodvar says, most creative artists have a big dark spot and a depressive streak in them. History is full of them. Start with Van Gogh and Beethoven. Yeah, that's right. David Hayes says he's 58 and still builds amps. Right on. Tore Down is a great track. That whole record's pretty darn listenable, and I think Eric plays the best that he had played since Cream on that record. And I don't know why everyone crapped on him for making that record. But I think if you go back and listen to it now, it's a really good record. I like it. I can still, his version of Before You Accuse Me is great. He does the Muddy Waters tune, boom, down, 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 boom. Gypsy woman told my mother, boom, down, down, boom, boom. Before I was born, Hoochie Coochie Man. He does a great version of that. He also does an astonishingly good version. I mean, really, seriously, go look it up. I'm going to get you the link right now, as a matter of fact. On that record, he does one of the best versions I've ever heard of Ray Charles' song, Hard Times. Let me see if it's on the boob tube here. Let's see if this is it. Hold on a second. And the guitar solo is incredible. Oh, good. There's an ad. Hang on a second. These little bitches with their shoes. Is this it? Oh, no, this is on Journeyman, though, isn't it? It's not on From the Cradle. But anyway, it's a great... Let me share it with you anyway. It's not on. Here, hang on a second. Who do I like that you may not have heard of? Oh, gosh, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It's Journeyman. I'm sorry. All right, Chell. Good night, buddy. Thanks for tuning in from Stockholm. I appreciate it. Who do I like that we may not have heard of? Oh, gosh, I don't know. I have pretty broad music tastes. I have to look in my iTunes or something and see. And I like all the main stuff that everyone does. The stuff that I listen to that I think isn't very mainstream, is the reason I brought this up, is Ray Charles. I really love Ray Charles. I listen to, it's all a lot of older stuff. I listen to Wes Montgomery a lot. Who else? Ray Charles. I mean, I like weird stuff too. Like, I'm really a big fan of Linda Ronstadt. But I mean, I'm a Zeppelin, Beatles, Stones, rock and roll guy as well. There's a band here in LA called Dead Sarah that I really love, and they just happen to be one of our customers. But I'm not trying to promote them for that reason. I really enjoy them. Dead Sarah to me has that rock and roll thing. Tame Impala. That's cool. Howard Johnson, you're doing a Ray Charles song with Toots in Belgium. Right on. Yeah, man. Ray moves me still. I just goosebumps. I never get tired of it. All right, we'll talk a little bit about 65. There's not much going on at 65 that's new. I am working on the reverb thing this week. I'm going to do a photo shoot tomorrow for all of our gear. We have new user manuals that are being finished today. And yeah, Dead Sarah is pretty loud live. Starting to get some pedal designs together. What am I modeling? What do you mean? I'm not modeling anything. I have to put on my mascara and shave my legs if I'm going to model something. Yeah, Dead Sarah uses our stuff. They're really good. Yeah, I'm an underwear model for Calvin Klein, if you guys didn't know that. Well, you guys all knew that, right? So, Vintage Trouble, thank you. That's one of the new bands that I do dig a lot, is Vintage Trouble. They're an LA band who didn't get any traction here, and they moved over to England, and they're huge. Check out Vintage Trouble. They're really good. Will you upload the manuals to the website? Yes, they'll be up probably in about a week. They're a lot more detailed and a lot better than the ones we have now. No, I do the Calvin Klein ladies underwear. Baseface Josh. I don't know if you know that. The thong is... That's my thing. You mentioned aftermarket electronics for Les Pauls last time. Can you recommend a maker? Yeah, sure. Are you talking about pickups or pots or what is it? Which amps don't feature the low watt high current setup in 65 land? Actually, it's kind of the other way around. The only two amps right now that are high current, low voltage, or the producer by far is the highest current, lowest voltage. And a second to that is the Ventura. So we're heading that direction. Yeah, RS Guitar Works. For pots, I recommend getting CTS match pots that are 500Ks, if it's a Gibson you're talking about. Getting match pots and getting a pot that is 500K and not 530 or 462. That does make a difference in the sound of the guitar. But RS Guitar Works, both my Les Pauls, that's where I got a matched. I just get the harness built and I put in my own caps. And they're perfect. They do make the guitar sound better. The caps... it's kind of what you like. You can go a lot of ways. If you can find old, Black Cats or Bumblebees on eBay, those are really good. Sozos work really well. I don't like the orange drops in guitars. I think it make them sound kind of bubbly and nasally, but there's a lot. You can't go too wrong with it anyway. Let's see. What's our highest voltage amp? The Tupelo? No, the highest voltage amp. That's a good question now. Let me think about it. Our previous highest voltage amp was the Royal Albert, which was about 480 volts. Yeah, the Tupelo and the Empire, they're 430 or something like that. John Pre says, can you send a 65 t-shirt and banner? If I have something, I think your order's already palletized. We're running some shirts here in the next couple weeks, and I will send you a box of them. You can just have some shirts. And, yeah, the banners. You do need some swag for your store, don't you? That's a good question, John. Thank you. We'll see what we can do. I can't guarantee it on this shipment, but I can guarantee you we'll get something soon. So... Sorry. Of course, I should have thought about that. Most of the banners that I have are older models that, don't exist. I don't even have one with a producer yet on it, which I have a feeling you're going to sell a lot of producers. Bring them in your suitcase. Good idea. Good idea. Good idea. Yeah, we're going to run some shirts like this with a bigger logo than this one, the one that's kind of like that. The Stone Pony is sort of out of production. We'll make it for you on a special order. It just takes a while. Yes, Dave, you need a shirt, and I'll happily send you one, brother. Don't worry. Can you get the Tupelo sound with lower voltage? I love that sound. Well, the Tupelo does have our master voltage on it. So you can drop the voltage on that amp. No problem. I think you can drop it down to like 110 volts. Should be very doable, I think. So, hey, Joe says, didn't expect you to see you still going. Yeah, we're wrapping it up here in a minute. I did not send any shirts to Chicago Music Exchange. They will get some. I just don't have any handy. I need to run some shirts, and I'm meeting with the guy right after the show to finish all the artwork on our user manuals, and we're also going to do some artwork for shirts. And then there's a big place just a few blocks from here. We can run them fast and cheap, and boom, thank you, have a nice day. Like 2-day turnaround. That was good. My Bud's Tupelo sounds great. Oh, thank you. I hope it does. Hyped to get the shipment. Right on. How loud is the producer compared to the London? It's a lot louder. It's 28 watts versus 18, which you go, oh, that's only 10 watts difference. But 10 watt increase is 55% increase over the London. So, plus it's big bottles. It's just got more girth to it. And then since it's just inhaling rich AC at that high current thing, the tubes are really, really burning. The way we're running those tubes is outstanding. If I send the VAH personal jet, would you bring a producer? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Any thoughts about a future amp with EL or 6Ls, not unlike the Royal Atlantic multi-channel, covers all sounds? I don't know what the Royal Atlantic multi-channel is. Peter Donker says, oof. Kid Gloves 2112 says, good question. If the producer is already low voltage and you lower the master volt even further, how low can you go and still have balls? Down to about 5 or 6 watts and still sounds pretty good. Oh, you mean combining 2 tubes in one amp? I don't do that. There's no way to get an output transformer that sounds the best with both of them. I can get output transformers that'll work with both of them, but one of those 2 tubes is not going to sound that great. And it's just kind of Mesa amp. Yeah, no, that's not what we do. There's a bunch of amps out there with mixed power tubes, and you switch between them, you can barely tell the difference. Because in order to get an output transformer that works really good with 6V6s and EL84s, you have to kind of meet it halfway. So you lose a lot of the character that's unique to those tubes when you do that. And, most output transformers are designed to this huge wide tolerance. And one of the keys to our sound is I tell my transformer manufacturers, I'm going to put tubes in there that have this impedance and this current draw. And they make me very specific transformers for those. And it just doesn't work. You're compromising when you do that. You're not getting the best of the 6L6s or the best of the EL34s. So it seems like it seems like a real big compromise to me. But I mean, have you ever played one of those amps that has different kinds of power tubes in it? It just doesn't sound that different when you switch between them. Not what you would expect. Oh, I'm going to have a Marshall and I'm going to have a Bassman in one thing. Oh, they got the same preamp. So right there, you're kind of limited. And you've got a compromised output transformer, so you're even further limited. It's just laws of physics get in the way when you do that. It's not a dumb question. I just have never played one of those amps where I notice much difference, especially when you're on stage. You know, it's not like you're going from John Mayer's 6L6 sound to Angus Young EL34 sound. It just, they don't do that. So I'm beating it up. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be diplomatic and explain it in a few different ways. Ustreamer 114590 points out, it does sound different, but not that good. Yeah, that's been my experience. It sounds great on paper. You look at it and go, hey, it's got, you know, it's got fried chicken and pork chops in it. And I like both of those, so it should be great. But, you know, fried chicken and pork chops don't go together that well. You don't seem to like high gain amps, but there could be a market for that if you offer a lower volume, longer tube life. I would love a low volt Diesel B4H or Boogie Mark II. Yeah, I'm not against high gain. It's just not what I play. It doesn't excite me when I play. And you mentioned a Diesel VH4 is a great amp as far as high. Like, I like Bogner's a lot. But I don't stay interested in those. You know, like, you know, sometimes like I go home to Missouri and a really good friend of mine is the Marshall rep for the Midwest. And he always lends me a JCM 90,000 or whatever they are. And I go play with my old band, and I'm just, you know, it's a lot of gain. It's easy. It's really forgiving. I like that. I can make mistakes and you don't hear it. And the notes that I don't hit with authority kind of come out anyway. That's really cool. It makes me feel kind of like looking at your package through a magnifying glass. Like, wow, look at that. That's huge. But it's not real. Richard Riesler. No, Terry. Terry Smith. Richard, do you know Terry? He lives in Columbia, Missouri, which is where I grew up. I have tried the EVH Celestion. It doesn't sound that great in our amps. It sounds good in higher. Yeah, Terry is a good guy. He used to work in the music store that I went to when I was a kid. So, and he grew up close to where I was born as well. Yeah, I mean, our amps are really friendly. You can put a lot of juice in front of it, and they're fine. Rock and Roll Willie says, are there amps with fairly flat EQ profiles? Yeah, but they usually don't sound good with a guitar. No, I was born in Sedalia, Richard. I think Terry's from Marshall. It's the next town over. It's funny, he's from Marshall, Missouri. And he's the Marshall rep. I guess it's Korg, technically. Columbia is a college town. That's where I grew up. I lived in Sedalia when I was a baby. St. Charles is over by St. Louis. We're from the middle of the state. You know, corn. Corn and rivers. Lots of corn, lots of pigs. Which is why everyone has a certain sort of silhouette there. We eat lots of corn and lots of pigs, which can tend to make your clothes hard to fit. This is one of the reasons I moved to California a long time ago. Nah, Missouri's awesome. It's great. There's not much of a music scene there, unfortunately. Do I bass fish? Yeah. I grew up smallmouth bass fishing, and then I married a girl from Georgia, so I go largemouth bass fishing with my in-laws all the time now. My wife's from Atlanta, and her brother is arguably the best fisherman I've ever seen in my life. Let's see. Rob Walker of the Southern band Stillwater just picked up his amp and dropped off A Mesa for repairs. What are you going to do to it, Dave? Pork is good if you sweat it to 52 hours. Oh, okay. Isn't Stillwater the name of the band from Almost Famous? Yeah, I fish. You have to know how to fish in Missouri. There's not that much to do there. I know how to fish and hunt and shoot, and I play baseball and football, and I know how to shoot a bow. All that stuff. Over an hour and you haven't said vocabulary yet. Hey, man. Are you saying my vocabulary is limited today? Bow. Yeah, we haven't talked about amps long enough for me to say vocabulary, have we? My amps have a large vocabulary. I can't think of a better word. Yeah, the band Stillwater from Almost Famous. Do I plan to do a Producer 66? Maybe. Very likely. Got to see if it sounds different enough than the 6L. I don't want to just go, hey, it's got a different tube in it. If it sounds too close. Definitely, I think I'm going to do one with 4 EL84s. You know, so it'll have the feel of an AC30, but it's probably only going to be 23 watts or something like that. Oh, thank you. Your amps are the best. Thank you very much. Could be a little lower volume. Yeah, it'll be lower volume. I mean, you could technically put 6v6s in your producer right now and it'll work. The output transformer is not really maximized for 6Vs, but it'll work fine. Yeah, actually, David, you have your RCA book on your bench right now. How much different is the primary impedance between 6Vs and 6Ls? So I think they're not that far off, are they? I can't remember exactly, but I think they're really close. So you could technically put 6Vs in your producer right now, and it's such low voltage, you can put any 6V6 in there, and it'll sound great. Will I make an amp that goes to 11? Sure, I'll make one that goes to 12. Leo Fender did. All the earliest Fenders went to 12. Yeah, so do you have a producer, Rock and Roll Willie? Stick some in there, see what you think. It's cathode bias, so it'll auto bias. Don't worry about that. And the bias circuit in there can handle that swing. That's fine. Give her a whirl, you lucky squirrel. Well, guys, it's 1:30 on the West Coast. And I'm starting to get shaky. I need some food. Food. So, any other questions before I go? Okay, kids. Cheers, Eric D11 says. No? All good? What is this link you put up? If I dime a 30-watt amp through a 30-watt speaker, can you blow the speaker from sticking an overdrive in front of it? Once you get into a square wave situation, yeah, you can blow a speaker below its rating with a square wave. It's hard for speakers to do a square wave. So if you've got an amp that's already in full clipping and you put an overdrive in front of it, you can blow a 30-watt speaker at 20 watts of output. Square waves are hard on speakers. Very, very hard on speakers. It kind of depends on your amp. I mean, see what's really coming out of a 30-watt amp is a rating. People like to put things in round numbers. It's very rare that an amp is actually 30 watts. More likely it's 28 or 33 or 31 or, you know, whatever. You need to measure your amp and see what it's really putting out. Also, speakers are all pretty conservatively rated, so they don't have to do a lot of warranty repairs. So a speaker that's rated at 30 watts, like, I can't say because I'll get in trouble, can take a lot more power and be fine. Richard says, eat something, bro, and tell Mr. Smith I said hi if you can. I will, absolutely. Terry and I communicate regularly. He's kind of like my big brother. Oh, cool. I'll check out the link, Dave. Thank you very much. Well, unless there's any pressing issues here, thanks for listening to me rant about my opinion on guitar music. I wanted to bring it up because it seems like there's conflict about this subject, and I don't think there should be conflict about it. I think there should be hope. And I think there is hope. But someone needs to see you Saturday, Howard. I look forward to it. Awesome. I think someone needs to put this idea out of the two music worlds need to unite a little more for music reasons, obviously, and for 5 other reasons that make a difference. A little bit of love and unity doesn't hurt anybody. Anybody. Even if you're a hater, it doesn't hurt. But especially for music. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. It's very nice. Rock and roll's my religion, man. I don't want to see it go by the wayside because nobody stood up and said, hey, what about this? I'd love to start a record label. I'd love to produce records, and that would all be very nice, but I don't have the financial luxury of doing that. So unless you guys want to start a record label on Kickstarter, do a crowd-funded record label, we need a lot of money. We need about $10 million. So if somebody wants to start the Kickstarter thing for me, I'll be in. I'll do it. Howard Johnson's in. Kent Gloves is in. If somebody starts a project, send it to me. I'll sign on to it. That's fine. You never know what you can raise on these crowdfunding things. It's amazing. 65 records dedicated to the evolution of rock and roll. Yeah, the record business is on the internet now, so let's do it. Just do downloads. It's fine. It's no sweat. It takes a lot of marketing. A lot of marketing budget. Making the records is the easy part. It takes promotion and marketing and feet on the street to do it. And vinyl. That's right. We can make some vinyl. There's a lot of houses here in LA you can make vinyl really cheap. There's one right over in, Eagle Rock or whatever. It's good, too. Anyway, love you guys. Thank you so very much for hanging out with me during your precious time that you hopefully aren't wasting by listening to me rant on. And I'll be back next week. There's a good chance I might be making noise next week. We're working on it right now. So, yeah, I'll sign all of you. Cheers, John. Thanks for sticking it out, man. For an hour and a half. That's pretty impressive. And you and I will be talking very soon. So on behalf of myself and everyone at 65 Amps, have a great week. Feel free to get in touch with me on Facebook and email and all those things. I try to be as available as I can. I'm always here for you. And for those of you in the Chicago area or the upper Midwest, go to Chicago Music Exchange. They just got in a whole pile of amps. And we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.